Thanks.
Do this, Brooke.
We did this before.
I know.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Colleges That Change Lives virtual days session here this morning. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. Housekeeping announcements before we get started. You can use the Q&A button on your screen to type your questions to our presenters at any time. Your camera and microphone are off, so the panelists cannot see or hear you. And this is just one of many different sessions happening. Be sure to sign up for additional ones where you registered for this session. And this presentation is being recorded. It'll be available within about a week, again, at the same website where you registered. It's all the housekeeping stuff I have. I will get out of the way and turn it over to our presenters.
We're going to switch over to some slides. There we go. All right. Am I kicking this off? Sorry. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you. It's a really early morning for Brooke. She's on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast. So at least the sun has sort of risen for me today. But we want to welcome you to our College That Change Lives presentation. So we're going to start with some introductions. So I am Kathy Finks. I'm at the College of Worcester, and I'm a former College That Change Lives board member.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brooke Yoshino. I'm Director of College Counseling at Flint Ridge Preparatory School in La Cañada, California, just outside of Los Angeles. And I'm a current board member of CTCL.
And I'm Chris Latham. I'm Director of College Counseling at Washington Latin Public Charter School in Washington, D.C., and I'm also a current CTCL board member.
Great. Chris, are you able to advance the slides? Great. So I think what we want to try and do today is really a couple of things. And we hope that most of the time that we can devote to asking questions. So as the moderator said at the very beginning, we hope that you will utilize the Q&A and we'll try and get to those as we're going through, but if not, definitely at the end. So we want to define who is and what is the CTCL, the College That Change Lives, our short acronym CTCL. We want to dispel some of those myths, those ones that I know as counselors you're hearing and working through every day. And then we want to provide you some tools that will help you and your students and your families really think about the college search in impactful ways of going about this. So that's what we're going to try and cover today.
Great. If we could just go to the next slide. Okay, fantastic. I want to give a special shout out to all the counselors out there. This is a particularly challenging month for many of us as we careen towards our early deadlines. So thank you for taking the time out of your really, really busy schedules to be here today and to learn a little bit more about colleges that change lives. CTCL is a nonprofit organization that was born out of the work done by Lauren Pope, who was a retired education editor and journalist with the New York Times, but then he went on to become a college counselor as well. And he just got really disconcerted and kind of disappointed by the constant talk about students just shooting for the Ivy League. And he set out to change the narrative around college choice. And so his idea was grounded in the belief that college admissions process should be centered on the student, not on the parents and what they want, with the goal of helping students find colleges that really help them to develop a lifelong love of learning and provide a foundation for a successful and fulfilling life beyond college. So it's not just college, but what are you going to do after that? So in order to do that, from what I understand, Lauren and his wife hit the road and they traveled to several different colleges and spent a lot of time at each school talking to students, asking them about their experiences, talking to professors, and just absorbing the environment on each campus. And so then he wrote a book that highlighted 40 of the schools that he thought were lesser known. They meet certain criteria, but still nonetheless provided really life-changing, wonderful experiences for each of their students. So CTCL was born from this work, and it was started as a way to continue his work of bringing down the kind of frenzy and intense stress around the college process when you only have 10 or 20 schools that you can shoot for that are acceptable. So as an organization, what we do is we serve as a resource that advocates for liberal arts. So we're always trying to get the liberal arts message out there. We support our member colleges through events like this, where they get exposure to large groups of people through college fairs and information sessions. And we encourage students and families to look beyond rankings. So I tell this story when I applied to become a board member. One of the things I wrote in my letter was that literally the first book that went on my shelf as a college counselor, a newly minted college counselor, was Colleges That Changed Lives. And I have at least one copy of it, usually two, because if I want to lend one out, I still have another copy. It's like a safety blanket for me. And I think that may have kind of gotten me the position here. So longtime supporter, because I do believe that there are so many wonderful colleges for students, and I love the process of helping them find those and watching the impact that it has on their lives later on. So moving to the next slide, it's a nice little graphic that we have showing you where the schools are located. So it covers 25 states. Most of them, as you will see, are private colleges and universities, 2 public colleges. Average enrollment is 1,500, about 1,500 schools. So what I like to say is, although they may be small in size, they're really big on impact. So the ability to really get to know your community is something that I think is front and center in a lot of these schools. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. All right.
And let me just add one thing here, Brooke, too, since it's newly kind of named, but almost all of our colleges now, I think it's 43. Chris, you might correct me if I'm wrong if it went up to 44, but colleges are test optional or test blind. And so I know that the pandemic really spearheaded and kind of moved that momentum forward, but the College That Changed Lives has been running that. We've been in the lead with this for a long time. Even last year, we had nearly 70% of our campuses that were test optional at that point. And so I think that's nice just to know as counselors that we've been on the forefront of this. We've also, a lot of us have been already reading and admitting students like this. And so just something else to throw out there as we're looking at that national map.
Thank you so much for putting that out there, Kathy. That's a great point. As a college counselor myself, I just have never talked about testing more in my entire life. And so this is a really important thing, especially for this year. I also think it's going to be important as we move forward from 2021, class of 2021 and beyond. So great point, wonderful point. The next slide gives you the names. And so as you can see, some of these schools may appear on your students list pretty regularly. Other schools, maybe not so much. And that's what I think is so amazing about this organization and this particular group of schools, because it exposes me as a professional, but then also my students and parents to some amazing options. And I have had students go to many of these schools and have really great experiences. And all of them, test optional, but also meaning what I also think that implies is there's a certain element of student-centeredness that is happening in the admissions process. Students are not just looked at as numbers and cutoff points, and they're really read in a holistic way that takes into account the whole student. Okay, next slide. So this is just a little rundown of our history. So publication of the book was, the first one was in 1996. And then a couple of years later, I think the member colleges started to realize that this is a real opportunity and harness their energies to try and work together to promote not only their schools, but the message of colleges that changed lives. And then in 2006, we had a revision of the book by the original author, Lauren Pope. And then that same year, the nonprofit is born with the 40 founding colleges. And with that founding, the advocacy of and member college support becomes more consolidated and unified, leading to the work that we do today as an organization. We've definitely evolved since then. Another highlight is in 2012, this is the fourth and I think last revision of the book. And it was done by Hillary Maisel Oswald as Lauren. She took over doing the edition for Lauren at that point. And with that new edition, there were 4 colleges that were added. And then in a couple of years later, we added Bard College as a member school as well. All right, so I feel sometimes in college counseling, I deal a lot in conjecture and things that, and rumor a lot of times. I can't tell you how many times parents come up to me and say, well, I heard that X, Y, and Z. And it's fun to kind of say, oh, really? Who did you hear that from? Well, my neighbor or my friend whose kid went to college or my dentist. And so I think there's a lot of stuff that, you know, because it's a big process, it can be a little daunting. People are naturally kind of inclined to seek answers, and they seek answers from each other. And sometimes it's not such good information. So what we like to do is put these rumors forward and then talk about them from the CTCL perspective to hopefully dispel some of them or bring a little bit of clarity to them. So the first one is the name brand school. And depending on where you are, this may or may not be as big an issue. But you know, the name brand schools, they come up a lot with our students. And it's sometimes hard to convince them, but most importantly, their parents to move beyond this concept. And so we pulled this quote from Frank Bruni, who is a New York Times writer, and he wrote a book called Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be. And I think this should be essential reading for all parents. If I could make them read this, I think I would, because it highlights some of the things that make a successful college experience, right? It's things like developing a close mentoring relationship, taking on long-term projects over time and working within their chosen fields, and then also getting involved with something on campus that ties them to campus, something that they get involved with deeply rather than kind of diffuse and short-term lots of projects, something you really concentrate on. And I think that the experiences of many students that choose CTCL schools mirror a lot of these opportunities and are often facilitated by the small communities that focus on student learning and engagement. Do these things happen at other well-known schools? Absolutely. But they can also happen at places where students and families may not have heard of. And I totally get it. You know, if you're unfamiliar with a process, you cling to the things that you've heard of before, whether it's through sports or through reputation or it being the oldest school in the United States of America. Well, therefore it must be the best. And we're really trying to break through those walls and kind of broaden the view, if you will, in meaningful ways.
Yeah, and I think, Brooke, going back to what you were talking about, even with Lauren Pope when he started out on this journey, and as a side note, real quick, I'm old enough and have been in this industry long enough that I'm still, when I was starting off my career, he would call us and say, "Hey, I have a great College of Worcester student for you," or "Hey, I think this is a great CTCL student for you." And he was still so passionate. And one of those things is that he saw so many students in his career, in his industry, in journalism, that didn't go to those Ivy League schools that were fantastic. And when he would hear from his colleagues that were looking at such a narrow band of schools, he thought, my goodness, you don't even know what these other schools are producing and how they're energizing and educating their students in such a meaningful way. And so anyways, yes, I think we all struggle at times with whatever that named brand school is for you. And I think it's so funny that it can be so regional. Yes, there's the Ivy Leagues that cross a lot of boundaries. But then if you look at school students who live in Wisconsin versus students who live in Alabama versus students who live in California, what those named brand schools are, those best schools, is so very different. And that's so, it's so ironic, I think, to think that, oh, well, those are the only schools that matter, right? So it's that age-old question, and we have it too on our side, the college side, about getting students to really expand their list. And one of the things that college CTCL really strives to do is just that, getting students to really think about their college search in a meaningful way. And so if you start off by asking or engaging your students in the question of who are you as a learner? What things do you really want to get out of your education? What excites you about an education? And it can be some of those things. I just want football. I just want a good cafeteria. I just want a sorority. Or I want research, whatever it is, but then digging deeper into that. Okay, well, what does that really mean? How does that really impact you? How does that help you then as a learner? Where do you want to be in 4 years once you graduate? I think sometimes students are so hyper focused on just getting into a school that they miss out on the next step of thinking about who do you want to be in 4 years afterwards, right? Where do you want to go beyond that? How is it going to help you get there? Going back to who you are as a learner, how have you performed best? Have you had those interactions with teachers in high school that have really propelled you? Have you had those classes that you've never thought that way before because it sparked from a conversation that you were having in a classroom and you thought, whoa, and it was one of those pivotal moments. Well, where's that going to happen? How's that going to look like? What is that going to mean for your search and kind of what you're looking at? And kind of looking, beyond just those typicals. Okay, let's think of a school and a name, but really thinking about how it's going to impact your education. So even by starting with some of those conversations, and we have on one of our brochures that is up on our website, and we pass out at college fairs when we actually have those, a list of really meaningful questions for students to start to think through. And so maybe that can help too when you're advising students. But and going back to your quote, Brooke, which I love from Frank Bruni, I think it's actually referencing, right, the Gallup survey where they surveyed 30,000 professionals who are in their careers and really looked at what impacted them. And it's all of these things, which brings me right into my next slide about what is it about a small school? And so all of our schools that are in this organization, they are all doing all of these things that are on the slide. And so why does that matter? It matters because of what we just heard from that survey of those 30,000 professionals. It matters because if you have that chance to have a close relationship with a faculty member, if you have that chance to really do some active learning, whether it's some kind of a pathway or it's some kind of an internship or some kind of major body of research, if you have that chance to hear feedback and learn from it and take it forward, all of those things go into making you a healthy, happier, and actually what we found is more successful person. And it's much easier to do these things at a small school. We're geared to that at CTCL. All our member schools were picked for this because we excel at this. We put the student center in everything that we do, including this COVID outbreak, and we can talk through that at the end. And so really it's about having that experience at a small school that can enhance your education, that can enhance who you are, opportunities that you never thought you would, pathways that you never thought you would take, because at high schools often, and even at some larger schools or some schools that are so rote, a pathway is just outlaid for you. Okay, you think you want to do business, okay, here you go, here's your next steps, but you don't have that chance to really develop some critical thinking skills, to develop some communication skills, to develop some pathways that cross boundaries. Even if you are going to be a finance person, how does anthropology affect that? How does the history, the economics behind it, how do those things cooperate and affect? And really at our small schools, when you're talking about those differences, really respecting those and bringing those ideas forward and really embracing it. So we think that small schools are absolutely the way to go. And you see that in terms of outcomes, which we'll talk about here later. But I know, Brooke, it's hard sometimes to get students to think small because they've been at a high school that's 2000 and they're like, that's the same size as the college. And so are there tips, or are there things that you've seen that have been helpful in getting students to kind of think outside that bubble?
Absolutely. So I work at a very small school. I'll caveat it by saying that. And when a student has spent several years with just a very small group of people, their knee-jerk reaction is, I want to get out of here. I want to get to a school where I have thousands of people that I can choose from. And I think there's also the perception that a larger school equals more opportunities. And so I like you said, Kathy, I kind of back it up and I ask them to think about, well, how are you as a learner? And they're like, well, I like to connect with my professors. Well, do you think that's going to happen in a class of 2,000 people, like literally a lecture hall with several hundred people? And then I always say, you are one person. Of those 40,000 people, how many people do you think you're actually going to meet and form close relationships with? It's hard when you're so diffuse and there are so many people in that area. And then in terms of opportunities, yes, there may be more bells and whistles, more expensive equipment, more labs, more research going on. But are you actually going to be able to get your hands on that? Is that geared towards you as an undergrad, as a sophomore, as a junior? More often than not, you're going to have fierce competition to get those same opportunities. Whereas if you look at a smaller school, they're there for you. They want you to do. They have many, many opportunities and programs set up where you can do the things you want to do, and without the kind of hustle and bustle and having to compete for those coveted small amount of spots that are available for undergrads. So those are kind of some of the sneaky ways I get kids to think a little bit differently about a variety of sizes of schools.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I also sometimes have them think about why a professor would choose to be at a small school, right? Because when they're job searching, they're doing the same search that high school students are doing. But oftentimes, or most of the time, a professor seeks out those small liberal arts schools because they know they're doing all of these things on the slides. They know they're going to have student interaction. They want that. They want that part of their career. They know they actually get to teach and engage at that level. They know that they get to have those conversations, that they're going to, on the flip side, go to choir performances and see kids on the soccer field and see swimmers, see volleyball players, see theater events, and you're going to have those relationships. So I think sometimes having them just even think about, oh gosh, why would a professor be at a small school, and why would that be different? Why would that be a different experience for them? Helps them understand just how accessible and how engaged those faculty are going to be at those small schools too. So, well, good. And I think one of the other myths that we have, if you can move the slide forward, is, can you pursue science at a liberal arts school? I mean, I would say, really, come on, of course. But sometimes when you're not in the industry, you just don't know, because as Brooke said, when you see the, huge labs at a big state school, you think, oh, I must go there. I must pursue this in this way. But actually, going back to that study, what we found is that being at a small school really helps. In fact, I'll just start by, one of my favorite quotes when talking about science at a liberal arts college is actually by Steve Jobs. And so he was saying that technology alone is not enough. It's technology married with the liberal arts, married with the humanities that yields the results that makes our hearts sing and that we'll need, moving forward. And I think that is so true, is that when you think about the liberal arts, you want to think about what's really important to students when they're in a science career, right? It's innovation, so it's newness, it's working together, and I think most importantly, it's getting an idea expressed and heard. Well, those all go back to things that Brooke and I were just talking about that are abound at these CTCL schools. So it's innovation, it's being creative, it's being forward thinking, it's about taking an idea that you've never had and actually having the time and the space and the resources for you as an undergraduate students to pursue those. It's working together with colleagues, maybe your colleagues in your science field, but also colleagues across the board. And how can you merge that together? Taking an idea, taking how Spanish language might affect something that you're doing in the lab or in a hospital system, taking those ideas and really working them together. And it's about that expression. So writing is so critical, presenting is so critical. If you can't get your idea expressed and heard, you're not going to move forward in the field, no matter what it is, but especially in the sciences. And so really having the opportunity to be at a small school where things are just at your fingertips, to be able to use equipment before you get into graduate school or before you get into your PhD work or your med school work is critically important. And so I think it's just helping them understand that, my goodness, this is what we do. We have scientists that are at these small schools really propelling and leading the way in some cases for the science field. And so you can see just how well, actually my college is on this slide, so I'll give a shout out to the College of Worcester, but looking at where students have had success, where they're going to medical school, looking at Juniata that has some affiliate programs, which I would say almost all of our CTCL schools do, whether it's dentistry or occupational therapy or physical therapy, all of those things intertwined. And so really we've had great success and we continue to have great success in this science field. But Brooke, is there anything you would add from your side?
Just that I'm always struck by the students that come back and tell me that they are being paid to breed fruit flies over the summer, and they're getting hands-on experiences that other people are just not able to get. And another thing, going off your Steve Jobs quote, is that I really feel like everything is so collaborative these days that if you can't see someone else's perspective, or you can't communicate effectively with them, you can't work within a team, your options are super, super limited. And I think that the idea, especially in technology, is we can teach you the techie skills. What we can't teach you is how to think critically, how to collaborate, how to work within an organization. And things are just changing so much that students really need to be able to be nimble and be able to be just not versed in one thing, but in many. So, and I think that these schools really do a wonderful job of preparing students in that sense.
That's a great point. And I would agree that the College Change Life schools, one of the fundamental part of their educational system is teaching students how to think. What are the questions that you should be asking? And there's no greater point for that than in the science field, in the STEM fields, where things are changing. And so it's not about knowing just the equipment to use or just, how this is performed in the past, but it's about, okay, we need to get to point X. How do we get there? How do I ask the right questions to get there? And that's something that is just fundamental in a liberal arts education, but particularly at our small schools where we are so nimble and we do so encourage that pathway through the science field. So I think one of the other things that you get was, oh my gosh, their price tags are so expensive. This is, why am I going to how am I going to be able to afford this? So let me first, just by starting out, that if you talk to any counselor, any admissions officer at this college that Changed Life Schools, we're all going to recognize that cost is an inherent part of the education. But what we would really like to talk about is the investment. We all work with us, our students and our families. We all want to have a diverse community of learners. And part of that diversity is also the diversity of socioeconomic. And so we work to enable our classes that they're filled with all different types of students. And so this isn't just for one type of student. It really is an education that can be afforded by the many. And that's what you'll see if you ask any of us who's in our pool, who are in our classes at each of these colleges. And so the other thing that you often hear is just what's up on the board is this debt crisis. And it is real. But I would caution to say that sometimes it just makes a great media story, right? And so what really goes into those numbers? Sometimes, a lot of the times, they're not quoting numbers of students that are undergrads finishing a degree, but they're including in there some nonprofit schools or some adult education learners as well. And so you can see kind of just on here where we fall with the averages at just a sampling of our schools and where the national debt average is. But I think the bigger thing, if you want to move forward, is that we recognize that merit scholarships are a huge part of that process. That we really want to know where the family is and how we can move forward. So when I talked about that investment, what is on this investment part? And so one of the things that we often talk about is that the odds are stronger that you see your education worth the cost 1.5 to 2 times higher if they've had a professor. It's going to sound redundant because it's actually a lot of the same things that we were talking about at the beginning. Have you had a professor that cared about you? Have you had a mentor that encouraged your dreams? Have you had somebody that excites you, that challenges you, that moves you forward? Have you had the chance to work on a project for a semester or longer? And that can be at various different things that we've found. It can be a fellowship that you were awarded. It can be a research project that many of our CTCL colleges have. It can be a project that you combined with your study abroad experience. Some of our schools have really intertwined those two. And we've talked a lot about the academic part, and we haven't talked a lot about how critical the connections are that students make with their peers. And so outside of just the classroom work, being really involved with an extracurricular activity and becoming a leader, learning how to communicate with peers within those make the cost of education when they surveyed those career professionals so much stronger. And then again, looking at those internships, it's easy to talk about internships, but I think when you dig into the actual stats of what our CTCL schools are doing, how they're integrated into their educational path, that it's not just something that a junior and senior pursues, but it's really talked about from the beginning. It's looked about as part of their academic plan. I think that's one of the big differences with our CTCL schools. And it also then becomes a big difference on whether they see it as a real investment or a return on investment in the end. Is there anything else you'd like to add about cost, Brooke, before we kind of?
Yeah, of course, a topic for our families. And we are located in California. We have a very affordable and very well-known state college system. So that kind of is the big giant in the room a lot of times. Well, why would I pay X when I could pay Y to go to UC or Cal State and have a perfectly good education? And so I try to get my families to do a balance of schools, because it's interesting that, like Kathy was saying, the CTCL schools are really interested in drawing people from all over the country, from all different walks of life, socioeconomics. And so when they break down the cost of being able to go to UC versus a CTCL school, sometimes it's pretty surprising that the financial aid grants and scholarships that are offered are comparable and make it affordable for families. So merit-based scholarships are something that are often a pleasant surprise. And sometimes people are like, I don't know how this happened, but this is what they're offering me as a way to try and make it an affordable thing for that family. That's
Yeah,
what I
we
would.
actually hear that too a lot. Like, oh, I had no idea that it was going to be as close or even cheaper than a state school. And so again, I think it just goes back into us really investing in who we want as students and looking for that across the board. I'll also point out here that we do have a College That Changed Life scholarship. So for those of your students that end up applying to being admitted to a CTCL school, there'll be an opportunity for them to apply second semester and then earn that scholarship if they attend. So, and then I think if you talk about outcomes next, I think sometimes families are surprised to hear just how impressive our CTCL schools do collectively. You know, if you look at, we had 6 Watson fellowships in 2018 alone. We had 42 Fulbright scholarships, 42. That's huge, a huge number of students, and it's such a selective process for them to go through. 32 Gilman Scholars were 3 of the top producers of Peace Corps volunteers came from CTCL schools, which is I think incredible. In fact, one of my students just was called to do CTCL last year and had to come home with the virus. But again, why do we get there? Again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's all of those things that we have in place to get the most out of our students and out of their education, the most out of having collaborative opportunities for them to engage with professors, to engage with their peers, to take those leadership moments, to really think about what they want their path to be, to really think about how they want to make an impact and what does that mean. And that's why we win these fellowships. That's why we get these Fulbright scholars. Because they really challenge them. We challenge our learners to be just that, to be learners, to be good citizens, to move that idea forward. And how do we do this? All with not being the 5% admitted. I know it seems crazy, but you know, if you look at the average rate of acceptances, it's about 65%. Now it varies, yes, from school to school. But I think the big thing that Brooke mentioned before is that we all truly mean it. We all read holistically. We are all looking for students that fit, just like students are looking to fit at a school. We're looking for students that fit with us too. We actually read council recommendations. We take those to heart. And so it is possible to be at a school that accepts more than 5% and have fully engaged and present and active learners who want to proceed and look at the outcomes that they do. So um, again, I think if you look at investment of the students' time, investment of our time to find those matches, which is what CTCL really strives to do, is to think about the college search in terms of matching, you can really have some success that might fall out of what they thought was a norm going into the search. So, Brooke, anything else you would add here?
Well, just like anything else, you know, if it costs more, if it's harder to get, if it's exclusive, it's therefore better. But at the end of the day, you know, a Louis Vuitton bag is still a bag made out of plastic. So, you know, it's getting to look beyond that exclusivity, equaling good or equaling, you know, valuable. And these outcomes are no surprise. You know, I worked at a small liberal arts school myself, and you just see the kind of engagement they go through. And then, of course, they're going to be motivated to go on and do these, continue what they're learning through all of these scholarships, all of these fellowships, and opportunities beyond college. So, again, um, just kind of further highlighting why a small smaller or a school like a CTCL school is a great way to expand opportunity, really.
And that leads us into the search process. So Brooke, do you want to talk about how we've expanded our search engine a little bit?
Again, as a college counselor, I love this because we're always trying to make it easy for our kids who are pretty tech savvy to get information about things. And so we have broken out on our website an expanded search engine that focuses on the schools within CTCL. So it's really nice because, as you can see, students can search really easily. Of course, major is a big thing for a lot of students, even though they're going to change it 3 times when they're in college. But just giving them an idea of what offerings are out there, which of the CTCL schools offers that. You can further search within an area or a specific state. Test optional is kind of, after this year, kind of a moot point, right? As everyone. And then even talking about varsity athletics. So you can do the search, and then if they're really interested, they also link directly to the school's website. So students can just click on and go directly there and get more information. So I encourage you to take a look at that and definitely direct your students to our website. So then we have listed for you in the next slide our website. Surprise, surprise. The National Survey of Student Engagement and Gallup research, which is really insightful and interesting into what students are doing and getting out of the college process as they're being surveyed. Some information about loan debt and a list of schools that produce PhDs. So we just wanted to throw up a list of resources out there for you to follow up with if you were interested in anything that we've talked about so far.
And we'd love to hear from you. So how can we help? How can we help you? Are there questions that you have? If you want to put those up on the Q&A, we'd love to take a couple moments to talk through those. And we hope that after this, you'll follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, see what's going on at our colleges. Hear, if there's any breaking news out there, if you're following us, then you can hear it. And as we move forward next year, and as we perhaps have in-person tours again or other virtual events, you can stay connected to those and pass those on to your students.
So maybe, Chris, are there questions
Yep,
out?
I see the question. So we have a question about the PowerPoint. It is being recorded, and I don't know how that goes out. I should have been listening in the beginning to people, but I know that it is available, so we will check into that for you.
It'll be available at the same place where people registered for this session. So at the same
Awesome.
website, within about a week.
Thank you so much. I couldn't see, Russ, I should have been listening. I apologize. It's early morning here, and it
No
is Monday,
worries.
right? All my days blend together with COVID. So are there any other questions out there? Well, I'm waiting for a question. This came up on a couple of the other counselor sessions that I've done, but I think it's really interesting to see how CTCL schools are handling the COVID outbreak. And I will say one thing that I've learned is that if it's surprising, but if you go out and actually look at what college presidents have said and done and what their public statements have been, you can really read a lot into what's going on and how much we are caring about our community and looking for ways to be innovative. And I think that's one of the things that CTCL schools do really well. Again, going back to their small size, is that we're incredibly nimble. And so we can move in directions and pivot pretty easily. And so it's interesting to see how it's done. So.
Yeah, I know from my end, my parents they have so much anxiety and questions about how things are being done during COVID. So, but I keep going back to the fact that I trust the colleges to look holistically when we don't have these traditional measures, and they just don't kind of trust the system just yet. But knowing what I know about college admissions, I have all the faith.
So we do have a question out here. Are CTCL schools reevaluated periodically, or are they fixed? You know, it's a great question. It's something as an organization that we've looked at. When Lauren Pope originally set out to look at the schools, we collaborated and allowed those schools to really work together. And then when Hillary Oswald went and reevaluated the books and added 4 more schools that were in like-minded, doing some of the same things that we've been talking about today, we added 4 more schools. And so those schools are all part of the CTCL organization. We haven't gone back and found a effective and a meaningful system for how to reevaluate schools that could be added to the list. But we do know that all the schools from the original founding are still doing and still producing scholars at an amazing rate. And so those schools are still in the organization, and we really collaborate together. I see Russ coming on, so that means we're probably about to end. But if you have other questions, Brooke and I's email was at the front of this, but you're welcome to send us emails or just to the CTCL website. We'd love to answer them. Thank you so much for your participation today, Monday morning. And Brooke, it was so good to see you. Thanks for being here. And Chris, behind the scenes, thanks for being our tech person today.
Absolutely.
Oh, and I want to thank everyone for attending and joining us for this session. When you close this window, there'll be a link to a very quick 4-question survey. Appreciate any feedback you can provide. Also, this is just one of many sessions being hosted. Be sure to sign up for additional ones where you signed up for this one. And in about a week, you'll be able to find this session's recording, as well as all of the other session recordings, again, at the same place that you registered for this session. Once again, thank you for joining us today for this session, and thank you to the presenters for being a part of it. Thank you. Have a good day.